So record. So hi, my name's Mark Sutton, and over in the corner there is Kay Chown, and we're going to be talking today about our upcoming course, which is Restoring Balance, which is about using various breathwork techniques to access the healing powers within your body. But really what we want to talk about today, and this course is coming up in about 2 weeks' time, but what we want to talk about today is some of the fundamental people who have been involved in the theories behind what we're doing in this course. And this course is looking at both the Western theories and the Eastern philosophies as well. But the guy we're going to be talking about today is a guy called Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich, for me, I first discovered him maybe about 15 years ago when I was teaching Tantra. And his idea of how a lot of the healing is actually involved, not just with the mind or the spirit, it's actually involved with the body as well. So I'm going to pass you over to Kay now to talk a little bit about Wilhelm Reich.
Okay, so what would you like me to...
Yeah, well, who was he? Who was this guy, Wilhelm Reich?
Good starting question. Reich was a psychotherapist, and he was a student of... He was around in the sort of early part of the century. I think he was born in 1897 or something, and he was around in the early part of the century. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. And he kind of split from Freud and became basically certainly the first Western, modern Western psychotherapist to suggest that psychological and emotional problems find expression in the body. So up until that point, psychoanalysis and psychotherapy had been pretty much all above the neck. So it was all based on talking therapies. And the idea was that the problem was with your thoughts about life, and the problem was all up here. There was very little involvement of the body, both in terms of the therapeutic techniques, but also in terms of the philosophy behind traditional psychoanalysis. The body just wasn't included in that at all. So what Reich said was that the body expresses the person's neurosis in exactly the same way as their behavior does, and in exactly the same way as their thinking does. And he claimed that he could kind of work out someone's neurosis from how they walked through the door. So specifically, he said that repressed emotions are stored in the body through muscular tension. He called these belts of tension, and he believed that they existed at kind of crucial segments, specifically existed around the kind of crucial segments of the body. So he kind of identified segments that were very vulnerable to the accumulation of tension. So that was his basic, that's what kind of made him stand out. And then of course, my first introduction to Reich was about 20 years ago. And at the time, he was very much a kind of fringe character in psychoanalysis. And he has been really for the last 80 years or however long his work has been around. And I discovered him during a time in my life where I'd been suffering from various forms of chronic ill health. And I'd become incredibly disillusioned with the sort of traditional Western medical view of illness. And it wasn't working for me, basically. And that got me on a path towards holistic thinking and looking at things in a more holistic way. And of course, Reich is holistic because he sees the mind and the body as one kind of unified field rather than separate. So he was part of that kind of holistic tradition. And I started just reading around and found it completely fascinating, and it made complete sense. So
yeah, I know people like Peter Levine really credit Wilhelm Reich with the development of these what they call somatic therapeutic techniques, but he was very controversial in his time. In fact, that controversy caught up with him in the late 50s, and he was imprisoned over it.
Didn't he go to prison a few times?
Yeah. I think it was for the strange thing. They didn't like what he was saying because he had a focus on what he called the orgasm.
Yeah.
As a means of healing, which these days a lot of people in Tantra sort of will focus on that. But he was talking about this free flow of energy throughout the body, which is.
He was a bit more sophisticated than that, wasn't he? In terms of like, it wasn't about sex and orgasms. It was, but it wasn't. It was much broader than that. So he talked about the orgasm reflex, didn't he?
That's right. Yeah.
Basically.
He put it as pulsation. He said that every organism, from single-celled organisms up to the most complex, have these things of pulsation, which is this flow of energy in an expansion and a contraction state. You know, imagine a slinky that sometimes you're feeling very expanding, sometimes you're moving to contraction. That's what Wright talked about in terms of pulsation. But his theory is very dense for me. I mean, so it became more accessible when he teamed up with a guy called Alexander Lowen. Yeah. So
he's a fantastic writer. And I would say to anyone who wants to get into Reich, I would read Lowen first, because Reich's work is really dense and heavy and boring. Because it's German translated into English. And, he's talking about orgasms, but it's quite tough to get through his stuff. Like I wanted to bring up as well, and I think this is one of the things that still makes him controversial, and he's still considered kind of woo in many circles, because he believed in something called orgone energy, which was a key part of his teaching. He believed that there was an energy that amplified living things, and it was the free flow of this energy that gave you good psychological and emotional health. And coming back to the orgasm reflex, he felt that the sexual orgasm was one way that this energy kind of was able to re-establish flow in the body, and that the body has various ways of both discharging and regulating life energy, life force. And that the orgasm reflex, and it doesn't just mean the sexual orgasm, it can also mean any kind of involuntary convulsive movement, I would say. So even things like a yawn or a stretch, or some of the kind of physical expressions people give after a trauma when it's healthily discharged, that kind of release, physical release. I would say all of those things would come under the category of
basically it's talked about the upward movement, this flow of energy that he observed coming through, and the belts of tension. They're physical manifestations that go lateral and through the body and across it, and they contract around it. And Lowen, one of the differences between Lowen and Reich was Lowen saw it as an individual level, Reich saw it as a societal level as well. So Lowen has some very interesting books out called The Way to Vibrant Health, and developed this system called bioenergetics, which we do use in our course quite a bit. But together with Reich, he came up with his idea, not one of the 7 belts of tension, which was and he called it segmental armoring theory. The way we protect ourselves, just like you said, this energy flow goes up. Sometimes the energy, as it comes up, there may be uncomfortable feelings associated around it. So to stop ourselves feeling anxiety, we compress and contract around in these belts of tension. And these are very, very specific to what they call character types. So then they took it forward a little bit more into the idea that we have these 5 character types which develop before the age of 7, from birth or pre-birth up to the age of 7.
He was similar to Freud in that way, wasn't he? Where he felt that the formative stage was the first 5 years. So very like Freud, he talked about repressed emotion, repressed material, and that material, generally speaking, got sewn in by the age of 5. And then that's what you carried with you into your adult life. So he kind of stayed on the same page as Freud up to that point. Where he differed was his kind of focus on the body.
Yeah, observing these specific patterns in the body. And as you said, this led to it with these particular patterns that developing these 5 character types. When somebody walks in the door, you could tell them exactly what the trauma was based on the way they were standing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, when you learn about the character types yourself, you do start noticing it in people. Like the way they, and you go, oh wow. And it astounds me actually that, you know, this was written, what, 80 odd years ago?
Yeah.
And that it just seems so relevant. It doesn't seem to have aged at all, the concept of the character types. I think they are probably archetypes of the human condition. So they are pathological expressions of various aspects of your humanity. And I believe Lowen did a lot of work on the character types, and he really expanded that idea.
Yeah.
So he took that from Reich, and then kind of, it's always why I recommend his writings, because he kind of made it accessible to a more modern audience. His writing on the character types, kind of specifically.
And that's something we're going to be looking at in detail. That's what's a 7-week course, because we have the idea of 7 segments within the body, and we're going to look at one segment every week.
Yeah.
And we're also going to relate that to each of the 5 character types. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. What specifically? What we do in the course?
Yeah. So what we're looking at.
Kind of the way we've structured it is we're actually doing a combination. We decided to do a combination of Reich's ideas and then look at how that corresponds with the Eastern esoteric chakra system. And the reason we've done that is because there's so many connections between those 2 schools of thought. So you've got the 7 segments, and you've got 7 chakras. Is it all right to talk a little bit about the chakras, because that's quite complex?
Because it's
so it's interesting when we were putting the course together. I was looking at kind of Reich's timeline, and then looking at the timeline of the modern kind of Western chakra system, and there are some interesting kind of observations to be made about the timing of this stuff. So the chakra system's very, very old. So it first appeared in early kind of Sanskrit writing. Then it kind of came into Western culture around about the turn of the century. In the sort of early 1900s up to about the 1930s, there were 2 writers, one called Charles Ledbetter. He wrote one called The Serpent Power. And then there was another guy, I can't remember his name.
Woodruff?
Yes, that's right, John Woodruff.
John
Thank you.
Woodruff, yeah.
And they wrote 2 books on the chakras. And what's interesting is that their writings are basically what gave us the modern Western understanding of chakras. It's a 7 chakra system. It postulates the existence of a flow of energy through these 7 chakras. The 7 chakras are located at the precise locations where Reich's segments are located. And the idea is that the chakras can become blocked or dysfunctional in various ways and stop the free flow of this energy. So already, like, it's pretty much exactly the same as what Reich is saying. But what I noticed was these writers were actually around. That's right. The ideas that these writers came up with, they were a combination of kind of Western esoteric stuff, magic. They almost certainly, the modern chakra system almost certainly bears absolutely no resemblance to the original Sanskrit. system. For one, in the modern system, there's only 7 chakras, whereas in the Hindu version, there are many, many, many chakras located all over the body. What I have to say, though, is because it might not bear any reference to the original material, it doesn't make it less relevant, doesn't make it less. These were brilliant writers. And I think I would postulate and stick my neck out and say, I believe that they will have been influenced by Wilhelm Reich's work. So I think the modern take on chakras has a lot of Reich's ideas like embedded within it.
Yeah, I know Osho actually described Reich as a tantric master, even though Reich never had any exposure to Hindu or Sanskrit or anything like that. He just did this by pure observation of what was going on. And so that would be form part of it, wouldn't it?
Man. Say again, sorry.
So that would form part of what we're doing, is we're looking at we're looking at these segments, which corresponds to the chakra. One way of maybe looking at it, very simplistically, is that the segments is a physical manifestation, the energetic sort of metaphysical manifestation may be seen as the chakra system.
Yeah.
And so that's, we will look at those every week. And Reich, in his therapy, called it vegetotherapy, because he understood intrinsically that it was involving the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
To the level that he understood that now. We understand that a lot more in terms of polyvagal theory. This treatment strategy, do you know anything about that? What he used to use?
Yeah, he used the basics of breath work, physical manipulation, massage. He would get the client to do certain movements, certain stretches. There was some hands-on stuff, and there was some stuff that the client did passively. And that forms the basis of pretty much all body psychotherapies now.
Yes,
so
yes.
The basic strategy hasn't changed. And more recently, trauma therapy. Obviously, we have polyvagal theory now, Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, which is the primary conceptual framework for trauma therapy. But I think what polyvagal theory does, and again, we include it in the course, I think what polyvagal theory does is it gives us a more scientific explanation for what Reich was talking about. So it gives us, we have more understanding of the nervous system. We understand more now how breath work, breathing helps to regulate the nervous system. And so, yeah, and it's fascinating to see these things taking off now. You said something earlier about how Alexander Lowen broadened. Reich was very much about the sort of individual. Alexander Lowen kind of broadened.
The other way around it. Reich was all about society, and
when
Lowen
you
was about the individual. Yeah.
It really made me think about how Reich's work and body psychotherapy generally and trauma therapy generally have all started to arise alongside the sort of environmental movement.
Right.
So there's a kind of a reconnection that needs to take place between ourselves and our bodies and our environment. So I think it's so pertinent that this is happening now and that therapy is going in this direction. And going forward, what I suspect is that body therapies, trauma therapies will kind of start to cross-reference with things like psychedelic therapy, because I think those two fields really complement each other, and they're both becoming kind of real burgeoning areas for research.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, psychedelics help to restore the connection to the body. They break down the barrier between the ego and the physical body. So I think, yeah, the combination of those two could be, it's really exciting, actually. The way things are going is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, so we could talk a lot. We could go into great, maybe we'll do that in another talk, about formation of character structure with how we do layers of ego defenses, emotional defenses, and physical defenses around what is our central core, and how that defines us Literally said it actually defines and creates our character. But we can soften that, we can change that, we can work with, particularly for me, it'd be a somatic therapy. So I do a somatic trauma therapy, specifically the biodynamic breath and trauma release system. So I use breath to access these autonomic nervous system signals and and body work. So this comes back into, again, what we're doing in the course. We're going to be looking at breath work to access the nervous system, and we'll be teaching people for each segment a specific bodywork exercises they can to release that tension that's been holding this energy in. Do you have anything to say about that when we do that?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's what we're trying to do is give people the tools that they need to develop their own. The first crucial thing is to develop awareness of your body in the first place, because so many people are dissociated. So the crucial thing is becoming aware of where tension is in your body, being able to locate it, being quite specific about where it is. And of course, as you develop awareness of your body, you become more and more aware, and you have a much more sophisticated understanding of what's going on with it. And then, of course, the goal is to help people develop the tools to release that safely. We talk a lot about a window of tolerance on the course. There are some breathwork techniques. I'm thinking of Wim Hof, who's fantastic, amazing, and he's done really important work. But I do feel like some breathwork techniques try to push things too hard, too quickly, and get a kind of big cathartic release. And I think there's a risk involved with that, of re-traumatizing the person. So we talk a lot about staying within a window of tolerance, and we work really hard to do that with clients, is to keep things within a safe. We don't want you to come, the goal isn't for you to come away having had, oh my God, I had a life-changing spiritual experience on the course. That's kind of not the goal. And if that happened, kind of great, but also high risk. So yeah, slowly, you're chipping away at things. I think that's the goal, is to slowly chip away.
Yeah, we'll be teaching techniques to do that. Yeah, so we do things called pendulating resourcing, which is a means of looking at the places where things are happening for you, charge, memory, emotions, and then looking at places where it feels calmer. And we can, by going in between the two, we're releasing all this energy that you bound in very, very slowly, very, very consciously. So it's a very modulated way of doing it.
And it should be. The goal is to get people on this path long term, like any spiritual practice or it's time, repetition, and persistence that matters, not achieving some dramatic transformation overnight.
And of course, we've done this course before that has happened. We have had people who have had some amazing insights. Yeah,
I would be really happy if people just came away with a greater degree of connection to their bodies and a greater degree of self-awareness. That's the whole point. Can I mention, I think it's a good point to mention felt sense. So there was a philosopher called Eugene Gendling. I forget when he was around now. I think it was the 50s and 60s. And he was looking at the therapy and what made therapy successful. And he looked at variables, all of the variables in therapy that may make the difference as to whether the therapy is successful or not. And he looked at various things. He looked at the experience of the therapist. He looked at the type of therapy, the type of complaint the client had. And what he found in his research was that loads of these variables had hardly a negligible effect on the success of the therapy. But he found one statistically significant variable that meant that, and that was the clients' ability to reference their feelings in their body. And he found that clients who could do that had far more successful outcomes in therapy than clients who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so like I say, even if we just introduced people to the idea of felt sense and what that means, and help people to amplify that.
And that is really, really interesting, because it ties into what we just said previously about the types of breath work. So what we do is it's a slow, connected breathing that allows you to stay access to the body. Breathwork modalities like Wim Hof and with holotropic breathing, as good as they are, they tend to create a cathartic experience or a transformative experience, which takes you outside of the body.
Yeah,
that is the major difference. That's the good takeaway, and that's why we teach you a lot about felt sense and how to be able to determine what's happening in the body.
Yeah, they're kind of in my 20s. I noticed a worrying kind of trend, and it's something that happened to me too, which was I would do various techniques and various practices, and some of them would create really profound altered states of mind. I would become very euphoric, and in a way I thought it was quite dangerous, because you can think that you're having some amazing spiritual experience because they come with such intense emotions and kind of euphoria and stuff like that. But actually, looking back on it, what was happening was I was just dissociating. And dissociation can feel really good. And the more grounded I've become, and the more I've done this kind of work, the less likely it is for me to have experiences like that. Because it now just stays grounded. I think it stays in my body.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, just to reference perhaps the final thing we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 character types.
Oh, yes.
This is something that everybody who's done the course has really gone, wow, that's me.
Yeah.
We look at each other and we talk about these types. Do you just want to say something briefly about these 5 types?
Yeah, I'll just kind of recap. So we talked about how Reich identified that repressed emotions get stored as muscle tension. Well, he noticed that there were certain patterns of tension that he observed in various people that could be categorized into certain types. And so he observed 5 basic character types, which were the schizoid, the oral, the rigid, the masochist, and the psychopath. And each type had a very specific set of muscular tension located or tending to accumulate in specific areas. And they also had very specific character traits that related to those belts of tension. And it's kind of, it's a bit like astrology. I shouldn't say that, but it's kind of like, it's a the way he communicated it was as if they were personalities. So he kind of completely characterized what he'd observed. And it makes for really uncomfortable reading. When you read through the character types, you will probably notice yourself in at least 1 or 2. Like I say, I think they are archetypes of the human condition, and they are the sort of pathological patterns that humans tend to form. And we take a character type each week, we look at it in more depth, and then we look at the area of the body associated with the character type, the chakra associated with the character type, and hopefully it will just give people some insight into themselves. And a really important disclaimer is you are not your character type.
Yeah, and another thing as well is to that. So we'll give you the tools to be able to explore this character type via breath work and open it up, and as it opens, then there is a positive to the character type. If you want to begin to heal and work with that, it's also important to say this is what's likely to happen as well. There's other sides to it that can come through.
Yeah. There's the kind of transformed version. I really love what Lowen says. He talks about kind of character types, and he says like the goal of the therapy is to increase the strength of your authentic self, which is the person you are underneath those layers of tension. And he talks about how at your core is love, and it's not flaky. He's talking about the love, a newborn infant who is pretty much free of tension, muscular tension. The force that binds that infant together with its caregiver, the infant is pure unconditional love, and that's what creates the bond with its first caregiver, which is absolutely necessary to survival. But that core doesn't change as you get older. You are still that core of unconditional love, and the goal of therapy is to make that core who you are again, so that you're not just tied up in this sort of neurotic tangle of character type.
And we will aim to support that in the whole of the course. We'll give the tools to actually be able to access this course
as we work on that ourselves.
Yes, of course we do, because these character types are there. You can become aware of them, and you can change them. It happened a lot for me during all this work. I began to become aware of my particular character type and what I needed to do to begin to soften those circles, those defense mechanisms I put around it. Because the idea is that our character is based on these defense mechanisms, and that we can begin to work with that to access deeper the feelings of love going forward.
There's so much we could talk about, like, and all of the things, we in the course, the Wilhelm Reich, Alexander Lowen, polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges. There's a hell of a lot of information, but what we found through it is there are so many cross references between all of those systems, and you could have kind of stuck to one system. Let's just do Wilhelm Reich, or let's just do the chakras, but it's kind of like using a slightly different language for the same thing.
Yeah.
So that, some people might resonate with the Reich's teachings, but they might resonate more with polyvagal theory.
Yeah.
And get access to the understanding that way. So I think, I'm happy that we've included
and
so
I think
many different threads.
Yeah, I think it's the way we've set it up as well. So it's also very practical. So we may do for the first hour. So each segment is 2 hours long. The 7 segments set over 7 weeks. So roughly about each hour is talking to them about the theory, whether it's the character types, polyvagal theory, whatever. We do some talking work, maybe some exercises. You then get a demonstration of bodywork techniques, which are videoed, and you can keep the video. And then we will do a breath work itself based on that particular segment. And that will be about 30-40-minute breathwork session. So there's a mixture of theory and there's a lot of practical work that goes in as well, so you can experience this. So we found that was a really good way of structuring
it's a lot to digest. And I think I like the fact that we've put the information in fairly digestible pieces followed by practical stuff.
Yes.
I think that makes it easier to digest.
It is, and we do give a workbook for all those who are interested and learn that way. You can have and that contains everything in. And I think that's a nice way just to wrap it up now. If you're interested, you can contact me. I'll give the contact details when I send this out. But our first course is starting on Saturday the 15th of January between 10 a.m. and midday. And the second one is Wednesday, the 19th of January, again between 10 a.m. and 12 midday. And I hope you're interested enough to actually pick up on this and join us. The feedback we're getting is absolutely amazing about it.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning we've already run 2.
We've already run 2 of these, yeah, the feedback is great. But Kay, if there was one takeaway that what would this give to you? What would it be for people who are interested?
So I think what I would say the goal of it is, and what benefits can be achieved through this kind of work is greater freedom, greater spontaneity, greater creativity. If you look at a child who's relatively uninhibited by muscular tension, the way they express themselves is spontaneous, creative, free, joyful. More of those things, please. Like, that's ultimately the goal of the therapy. Is Reich talked about that. He said, like, the goal of all therapy should be able to liberate the organism so that it's able to express itself fully and authentically from your core. You're able to express that freely, without inhibition and without conflict, ideally. That's very idealistic, isn't it?
It is. It's achievable.
That is the goal of therapy.
It takes time and work, but it's nice to actually have the tools to be able to do that. So
and
that,
I can testify to that. I am more creative, freer, more spontaneous.
Yeah, I've seen some of your paintings. They're brilliant.
As a result of doing work like this. So yeah, it works.
Great. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch us, and hopefully we will see you in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, have a great evening, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.